Welcome to the Stimulating Beverages lecture for plants, humans, and the environment. Stimulating drinks are those that contain caffeine, which is in a class of chemicals called alkaloids, which we'll talk more about in the medicinal plants lecture. But alkaloids have an effect on the physiology of an animal in several ways, producing physiological or psychological effects. The first stimulating beverage we are going to go over is coffee. There are three major cultivated species, each with different flavors and levels of production. The three species are Coffea arabica, canephora, often called robusta, and liberica. The plant family is the Rubiaceae family. The plant originated in Ethiopia. The fruits of the plant are called cherries, but they are not cherries. The seed, which is the coffee bean, is inside that edible pulp of the fruit. Coffee is the second most traded commodity, coming in behind crude oil as the first. Coffee is produced by about 25 million coffee farmers and workers in over 50 countries. You can see on this map the countries that coffee is grown in. It is a tropical shrub that grows best in cool highlands with significant rainfall and stable temperature. The abbreviations on the map stand for the different coffee species, R for Robusta, A for Arabica, and M for both. Most of the coffee produced is Arabica. The others are more productive plants, but considered lower quality. The coffee plant is an evergreen shrub that can reach up to 30 feet in height, but is usually kept below 10 feet when it's cultivated. Its native habitat is the understory of a tropical forest, so it is adapted to grow well in shady conditions, particularly under the canopy of a mature rainforest. Coffee that is grown under some degree of canopy or tree cover is called shade-grown coffee. However, most industrial-scale producers cut down the rainforest and grow coffee in the open sun, usually in plantation style. This is less sustainable for a number of reasons, and it also affects the quality of the coffee. It is harmful to the environment because of the effect on migratory birds. 60 to 80% of the birds we see returning to eastern North America in the spring and summer spend their winters in South and Central America. Bird habitat is being destroyed in both northern and southern territories, and habitat loss or degradation is the largest cause of declining bird numbers. Shade-grown coffee provides habitat for bird species, and properly planted shade-grown coffee farms can have 90% more birds than a coffee plantation growing in full sun. Only a tropical rainforest will have more birds than a properly planted shade-grown coffee farm. The impact of coffee plantations can be very significant for certain bird species. For example, coffee plantations occupy 44% of the available cropland in northern Latin America. So if the coffee grown in these areas were shade-grown, it would significantly improve local bird habitat. Again, the birds benefit from shade-grown coffee because it provides habitat, which means nesting sites and food sources. The birds do not necessarily enjoy the shade cast by the trees. Also, water resources are heavily used, and the environment is contaminated by increased use of chemicals when coffee is planted in full sun as a monoculture in poorly maintained soils. The soil quickly dries out and becomes nutrient deficient, requiring water and fertilizer. The plants are, of course, more susceptible to pathogens, so they have to be sprayed with chemical pesticides. But shade-grown coffee requires relatively little inputs once established because it is adapted to grow in those conditions. There are also differences in the production and quality of the coffee. Growing coffee in the sun does double the productivity of the plants, so sun-grown plants will produce more fruit at a faster rate, but the plants don't produce as long as shade-grown plants will produce. Shade-grown coffee plants will produce for up to 30 years, while sun-grown plants will only produce for about 10 years. The shade-grown coffee is also said to have a better flavor. This would be due to the difference in growing conditions. Shade-grown coffee experiences slower growing conditions and interactions with other plants, animals, and soil microbes, which results in the production of more complex compounds in the coffee beans. Industrial production of sun-grown coffee has the same effects that are present with any large-scale mechanized agricultural model. Shade-grown coffee farms can take a variety of forms. They're usually small subsistence farmers or small-scale producers. The coffee plants can be mixed with other crops, for example rubber trees, seen on the bottom right, or grown in an actual rainforest. This graphic demonstrates a gradient of growing methods, from full rainforest cover at the top to mixed polycultures, for example cacao, rubber, cloves, cinnamon, to monocultures at the bottom. The biodiversity, or the number of different species that can find suitable habitat there, increases as you go up the list. But short-term coffee yield goes down, decreases as you go up the list. The different growing methods have different degrees of vertical stratification, or the number of layers of vegetation at different heights in the forest. More modern growing methods will have fewer forest height levels than more traditional methods, and will therefore support fewer species and have less biodiversity. This is especially the case for bird species because different species may live at only one vertical layer in a forest. So even if some shorter shade trees are left in the coffee farm, those birds will not be able to survive there because they require taller trees. The particular places where coffee is grown overlaps with some of the highest areas of biodiversity in the world, making it an extremely important consideration for endangered species conservation. The orange regions of the map show areas of high biodiversity that overlap with coffee growing regions. As with organic agriculture, there are a number of organizations that certify rainforest-friendly or bird-friendly or shade-grown coffee to let consumers know how the coffee was grown. Different certifications have different shade requirements. For example, OCIA requires shade grown as part of their organic certification, but USDA does not. Most of the major coffee companies do not grow their coffee in the shade, and consumers are therefore contributing to rainforest destruction, environmental pollution, and declining bird numbers by purchasing from those companies. There are also some environmental concerns in the processing of the beans after harvest. After harvest, the beans must be extracted from the fruit. Either the beans are dried, then a machine hulls the fruit, or the fruit are stored in a tank of water that carries the fruit to a pulping machine that removes the outer layers of fruit. The coating of pulp remaining on the seeds is then removed through an enzymatic process before the beans are spread out for drying. The process uses a lot of water resources and generates considerable pulp waste, much of which makes its way into streams. For example, tons of pulp can be discharged into waterways every year, resulting in harmful bacteria growth akin to what would occur if sewage sludge were dumped in the river. Recent studies that have investigated the impact of coffee production on waterways have confirmed that the stream chemistry can be so impacted that many of the rivers not only pose a threat to ecosystem health, but also to human health. Coffee beans are green, but become darker shades of brown with increasing roasting temperature. As the temperature increases, the beans will also become oily to the touch. Coffee roasting produces air pollutants like particulate matter as part of the coffee seed disconnects and becomes airborne, but also gas emissions like volatile organic compounds, or VOCs, for example formaldehyde, resulting from the breakdown of the sugars and oils in the coffee beans. Combustion byproducts like nitrogen oxide, carbon dioxide, and carbon monoxide are also emitted by the machines that do the roasting. And the roasted beans contain some quantities of a chemical called acrylamide, which is a suspected carcinogen. These compounds are present in foods that have starches and are cooked at high temperatures, including potatoes, bread, cereals, coffee, and others. In general, the roasting process converts the starches in the beans to sugars, which are then caramelized and burned in the darker roasts. The reason why some beans look oily is not because they are higher quality necessarily, but because the high temperatures cause the oils to rise to the surface. The process poses certain health risks resulting from the air pollution generated. The decaffeination process also has a number of important environmental concerns because many of the chemicals that are used to extract the caffeine from the beans are very toxic. The most common method, for example, uses methylene chloride, a very toxic chemical. Formaldehyde used to be used but has been banned. If you see naturally decaffeinated, that doesn't mean the beans don't contain caffeine naturally, but that naturally occurring plant compounds are used as the solvent to extract the caffeine. All organic decaf requires the Swiss water method, in which the caffeine dissolves in water, but it reduces the flavor some because many of the flavor-producing compounds also wash out of the beans. There has been some use of supercritical CO2 in recent years, but it takes a lot of energy and is really expensive at this point. Although there are health concerns with acrylamides and caffeine, coffee actually contains a large quantity of antioxidants and is actually the largest source of these compounds in the American diet. Antioxidants inhibit oxidation, which is the transfer of an electron to other molecules in the body. Oxidation causes free radicals to form in the body. The free radicals can damage cells, posing health risks, including cancer. So antioxidants have been found to reduce certain health risks. Although this chart would appear to show that coffee has lots of antioxidants, it actually is showing the relative amount of antioxidants that are represented in the standard U.S. diet. Rather than getting antioxidants from a healthy food source, most people in the U.S. get most of their antioxidants from drinking coffee. However, recent research has recognized that antioxidants from sources like coffee may not provide the same degree of health benefit as those from healthy foods. This concludes part 1 of the Stimulating Beverages lecture. Be sure to watch part 2.